The Sacred Union podcast is an epic deep dive into humanity's purpose at this time of planetary change, into the union of soul and body and what it means to truly live from soul. It is about the union of masculine and feminine and patriarchy and matriarchy into a partnership culture. It is more than just a podcast. It is an experience, a transmission, an intimate meeting with people who are creating the more beautiful world our souls know is possible. Welcome everybody to another episode of the Sacred Union podcast. I am Bibi Grazia, your host, and today I have the honor to interview Jan Day. She's a Tantra teacher, a relationship expert, and a psychospiritual teacher. Jan Day has been teaching and leading workshops in Europe and Hawaii since 1999. Jan's life and work have been influenced by both Eastern and Western spiritual teachers. She was a sanyassin of Osho for 15 years. And over a period of 20 years, Jan trained and then taught with Alan Lowen, the founder of The Art of Being. She has developed the Living Tantra series, which is a series of workshops that she offers that are based on the Body, Heart and Soul series created by Alan. She's also been influenced by other teachers like Jack Cornfield, David Deida, Ron Kurtz, Ken Wilber, Jambo Roshi, Thomas Hübel and Amachi. Jan today lives in England with her husband, Frida Fischer, who leads sections of the workshops, and he brings his own magic. And I have wanted to speak to Jan Day because we share a similar path. In many ways, she is an elder and has been very well established in England for a long time. And we explore what Tantra has to offer at this particular time of instability, of increasing uncertainty, and how important it is in this time to connect with ourselves in a deeper way, to really embrace our sensuality and our sexuality as something divine, to learn how to become better at relationship, and also to develop a relationship with the divine itself and with community. And in this podcast episode, which was one of my favorite episodes so far, we really explore the meaning of Tantra, what Tantra can really offer, what she teaches, and she also shares some upcoming workshops. So stay tuned and let's dive in. Welcome to my podcast, Jan Day. It's such an honor to have you here.
Yeah, it's beautiful to be here. Thank you.
I would like to start with the question, what comes to your mind when you hear Sacred Union? First thing.
First thing, Sacred Union, I suppose, a sacred union with the divine. Like to really feel beyond ourselves and feel our connection to all life, all being from the beginning of time to the end of time. Like that sense of sacred union with the oneness, but also sacred union with, when we are human beings, we live in this human life. And so sacred union is also very profoundly what happens when we're in relationship with somebody where it's not so much about what's happening, like what we're trying to get or where we're trying to get to, or, this kind of romantic thing. But it's more about, okay, we're in this committed relationship together, we're together. And when we sink into that and surrender to that, what emerges and what gifts come out to the world? Who are we when we let ourselves surrender into that and let our creativity pour out of us? And for me, that's sacred union, and that comes from being connected at all levels. So connected, like at the very base level of our survival instinct, where we're just creating a home together, but really coming together at the level of our sexuality. So we're creating a divine connection there that is beautiful and that opens us. that we're connected together in our power, that our energy goes out, like we meet there, we meet in our hearts, we meet in our expression and our voice and how we take our gifts out into the world. We meet in our connection to um, our intuition, our connection to soul, and we meet on a spirit level. So it's like sacred union is on a personal level, like on this human level, is about meeting in all our energy centers so that we vibrate together. And there is no kind of, well, I'll give you love if you'll give me sex, which is actually, it's a pretty big story. So it's more about meeting on this and this very juicy connection at all our energy centers. Yeah.
I feel really moved and really well met through your through your answer. I feel yeah, there is alignment also because of the path we share. I don't know if
Yeah.
you know that I also
Sure.
started exploring Tantra over the years, and you are one of the most embodied, the most ancient tantrikas in England.
That's
Because
probably true.
yeah, and I've heard so much about you. So many friends of mine have learned with you and studied with you. So people will have heard a little bit about your bio already, but I would love to hear from you what brought you onto this path. Mm,
Yeah, sure.
mm,
So in my early life, in my 20s, I was a research chemist. I was deeply into science, really enjoying it. I loved it. It was very creative. It used my brain, totally happy with it. But in my teens and in my 20s, I was already married as a teenager. And my sexuality was dysfunctional from basically from about 13, we can say. When I met my first husband, I married him later. It was an extremely dysfunctional and relationship that put kind of cemented me in a path of thinking that sex was bad and disgusting and to be avoided at all costs. And so then I left him, and gradually, as I grew up and began to grow into a woman, because I think I was completely in denial of even being a woman when I was in my teenage years. As I grew up and began to, my womanhood began to kind of bud out of me. Um, I gradually began to try and reach out and find my sexuality in all kinds of clumsy ways. And I was actually extremely good at walking into a room of like 50 people and being able to pick the one man who would simply not be able to meet me as a sexual being. And then eventually, that that began to change, and it really set me on a path. It began to change through having met a man who actually could meet me. He was a lot older, but actually he was a wonderful um, first lover, and I cherish my memories of him. He was significantly older than me, and not available as a partner, but as a man who initiated me into a very caring sexuality. It was beautiful. But then it went downhill after that again because it didn't stabilize. So I really did have to keep finding my way back. And that probably took about 10, maybe even 15 years of going through cycles of meeting people and like getting closer and then falling and getting closer and falling and then I also spent quite a lot of time with Osho, and that was quite healing for my sexuality. I mean, there was all kinds of stuff that was happening that I wouldn't rejoice about, but actually in terms of healing my sexuality, for me, that was very helpful. So I was actually for a long time working with Alan Lowen in the Art of Being and worked for him and with him. And um, and then I was in Switzerland. I was working with a therapist, and he sent me to Amma, and uh, I really was impressed. I really loved being with Amma. I still love being with Amma, and I was at that point really thinking, oh, perhaps I'll go and live in her ashram. And then I realized that she keeps the men and women apart, and there is kind of sexuality is a little bit kind of pushed out.
Mm.
And I realized, oh, that doesn't actually work. In this lifetime, my work is healing sexuality. And and then there was this kind of sweet realization that, okay, even if God tells me sex is wrong, I realize that's not true. And I realized that was done. Like I knew my sexuality was good and beautiful and clean and part of existence, and nothing was going to convince me otherwise. And I think it was probably quite soon after that. I was then at that point also working for some Tantra teachers in Hawaii. And I began to teach with them, alongside them, and then separately. And it was like the I realized I'd done my work and it was time to start giving it back. And and I realized that by teaching, I also gained a huge amount, but it's like I could carry on growing through teaching. So that's where things unfolded. So really, I came onto this path through despair, you could say, desperation. I mean, my sexuality was so dysfunctional. I had to do something. There was no like, well, it's sort of okay. It wasn't. It was a disaster. So there had to be a lot of learning and a lot of growing.
Mm. I relate to that so much.
I'm afraid there's probably a lot of people who feel like we didn't really get a good chance to celebrate and discover that our sexuality was good. The goodness in it, the beauty in it, that isn't really, I don't think we've really had that. It's not culturally embedded,
Yeah, it's
unfortunately.
still a big mystery to me, and at the same time, also it makes perfect sense in some way when you want to suppress people, then take away their superpowers. And for me, sexuality
Yeah,
is definitely, a superpower connected
yeah,
to life force, to our
yeah,
joy, to our aliveness, and to have
absolutely. Yeah,
taken that has made us probably more vulnerable as a collective, as a culture in many ways.
yeah,
You mentioned two big names in here, and I'm
mm,
aware that maybe not everybody knows Osho and not everybody knows Amma. I wanted to
yeah,
pin
mm,
down a little bit if you want to describe
yeah.
who those people were to you.
So when I was when I spent about 15 years as a disciple of Osho, and I mean, there's been some big films about Osho. He was an Indian guru. I didn't know him in India. I knew him in the States, and um, it was like um, it was a wild time. It was a wild, powerful time of exploring freedom. I was very young. I don't know, like 26 or something. Um, it was a big exploration. It was the first time I'd come across anyone who didn't make sex like really wrong. That there was, it was my first possibility of bringing sexuality and spirituality together. And for me, that was supremely healing. There came a point when I realized that the way things were going on the ranch in Oregon and the way things were going in general were didn't really fit me anymore. And I needed to move on, and I moved on. And the therapist I mentioned in Switzerland really helped me do that and find other ways forward
Mm.
with my spirituality. And then later it came out that, some things had been going on at the ranch that
Mhm.
really were pretty dark.
Mhm.
I would say that I think um, I don't think most people were aware of that. I actually don't think Osho was aware of it, to be honest. He wasn't into the day-to-day running of things. There was actually a group of women who were running everything.
Mhm.
It was largely a matriarchal society.
Mhm.
And but when I saw what was happening and how it, not surprisingly, a group of normal human beings comes together, they do their best, but they're still human beings. They're still making all kinds of mistakes. There's still power still corrupts. And a lot of people had a lot of power, and that power did cause a lot of corruption, I think, and a lot of really toxic stuff to happen. So I kind of keep a bit of a distance from it now. I treasure the gifts I got from it, but I wouldn't send anyone there now. Like it served me, but there was also a lot of dark. darkness in that. Um, and then Amma, so she's this beautiful hugging saint who from India. Um, the therapist I was working with, he came. Um, he said to me one day, what's your relationship with God? And I said, well, it's kind of a bit weak, probably. And he said, well, do you want to build it? And I said, yes. So he started basically sending me off in all directions to different, in different things to find my way. And he sent me to Amma in Zurich, and it was an amazing evening. I mean, I think it really touched me deeply, like to my core. I could feel when I drove home, I could feel my heart kind of vibrating with love, like almost bursting. It was really, really a beautiful, powerful experience. And at the end of the evening, they asked, anyone who was happy to kind of come and clear up afterwards or help, clear up the room, the hallway. And I went back in and to help. And then at some point the curtains opened because people were sweeping on the stage, and Amma was up there sweeping petals herself on the. She was also clearing up. I mean, there's this figure who's been working on really being there in presence with people all day, and now she's sweeping up petals, and it just made me weep with a love of, like, this immense love she gave out and the humbleness both together.
Mm,
It really deeply touched me.
mm,
And yeah, so I mean, she's in London, I think, this weekend, actually, this weekend coming. She does come to England, and she certainly visits Europe, and she hugs people, and people sing mantras. And yeah, she was probably my first earliest introduction even to mantra singing, actually, which I now introduce into the workshops quite regularly. Yeah.
What's your relationship with God now?
Um, Now I would say probably it's more towards Shiva, I think now. More like I feel very deeply touched by the Shivite traditions, and in our workshops we use the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra texts very frequently. I find them deeply touching. Especially there's a version of it, quite a contemporary version, but I find it very beautiful, called the Radiant Sutras, and that's by Lauren Roche, a translation by Lauren Roche. That I would say is deeply meaningful, and I think all my students have a copy of it probably. Um, so I would say my relationship with God is in every moment now, like everywhere, everything I look, everywhere, everyone, every experience is to use to grow. So it feels like it's a very tantric relationship now. And now I would say I can relate very easily um, through the Hindu gods. They speak to me as archetypal representations of our longing to be in that sense of oneness and connection.
Mm. For
Yeah.
all those listeners, Shiva in the Hindu traditions is the form of consciousness, um, and has a masculine quality. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he often is described as a yogi, sitting in the Himalayas and Mount Kailash and being in meditation for eons.
Eons. But also, what's magnificent about Shiva is that not only he's sitting on Mount Kailash Mount Kailash in meditation, he's also a family man. He's the only one of the Hindu gods that holds both,
Mm.
who can be a family man and be uh, in connection in that way. And so it also speaks to, the relationship between man and woman and creating family and children and yeah.
It was actually at the birth party of this podcast that I shared the story of Shiva and Shakti,
Yeah,
being form
yeah,
and matter, and
yeah, yeah,
watched a few documentaries, and yeah, just really went deep into the myth of the union, the sacred union
yeah.
between the two.
It's beautiful. The stories are so beautiful and touching, and I love that they speak to our humanity, but also take us beyond that. And yeah, I love those stories.
I asked you about how you relate to God because I had an experience this weekend, I guess, really feeling into the question, like, what is this great mystery actually for me, given everything that I've learned and you know, sort of this challenge to understand something through my mind, but also through my body and my heart.
Yeah.
I felt really tested to really, what is it actually that I believe in? How do I experience the divine through me? And so just before we went on to this podcast, I was listening to your book, Living Tantra.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
you shared exactly that your therapist in Switzerland asked you about your
Yeah.
relationship and this evolution, this development, which is, I think, a really important piece in our time to find our connection to the divine without religion,
Yeah.
without the dogma
Yes.
and everything that we have learned.
Yeah.
Because I believe Tantra is a lot about. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about the meaning of Tantra and what Tantra means to you.
Yeah. To me. Yeah. So I would say it's probably important to say that the Tantra that I teach would be called Neo Tantra.
Mm,
So I'm not teaching the classical Tantra that was developed about 600 AD for that time and that place in India. What I am doing is bringing those teachings into our contemporary time in a way that I believe honors the teachings and honors the essence of what Tantra is, which for me is about really using everything to grow in love and consciousness. So using our everyday life, using our relationships, our work, our relationship with nature, our relationship to our community. It's like everything is Tantra. So sometimes people think, they say, oh, is that one going to be a Tantra workshop? And I
mm,
say, well, everything I teach is Tantra because I'm a Tantra teacher, but that doesn't mean it's all about sex. It means sex is included, but it's not all about sex. It's including everything. It's not leaving anything out. So we're going to work with communication, and we're going to work with relationships, we're going to work with shadows, we're going to include everything. And of course, we also include lots of explorations of sexuality because it's such a it's such a powerful energy, and it is so dysfunctional in our time that it needs, like, those two pieces together mean that it's a really important piece to work with. But of course, not only that, it needs to be included. And what I see is that when we start, like, going into embodiment, because we can't go into sexuality without coming into our body. So when we begin to go into embodiment and really connect with ourselves, and then begin to connect with our sexuality and accept and honor and love that, and let those energies move in us, then the what I see happening for people is they become alive, they become confident. It's like they become bigger because they've stopped pushing down and repressing and denying these very powerful energies that are simply part of us. Yeah.
Can you share a powerful story from your teachings, your experience as a Tantra teacher? Anything that comes to your mind?
Um, I think it's hard to pick one thing. I would say overall, the most powerful experiences are being almost overwhelmed with love, seeing how people grow and how they grow in love and grow in surrender and grow in themselves
Mm.
when they begin taking tiny risks to connect with themselves and with each other. I mean, just that's the overwhelming thing. It's just being so moved by people, the courage that it takes to show up and and connect with ourselves and with each other, and the incredible rewards and the love that comes from that.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I'm curious. specifically because a part of this podcast is also about the relationship between power, sex, patriarchy, matriarchy,
Mm,
as a theme around systems change. If there is maybe anything that you want to share on the dynamics between men and women, or
yeah,
perhaps what sort of
yeah,
encounters have you made in that domain?
yeah, yeah, that's an interesting topic.
Mm,
Um, I think the first thing to perhaps say is that both men and women have culturally been given a bad start in our time. And I see lots of men and women both who are terrified of sexuality, terrified of getting it wrong, not knowing what to do, um, not knowing how to meet each other, not knowing what they should do or what's expected of them, or like thinking that they I mean, it's completely screwed up, basically. So I think to some degree, men aren't any better off than women. They just have different wounds right now.
mm,
Now, amongst all that, of course, there are a group of men who are using their power to groom, trade sex, use their power to get sex, kind of doing a sex love trade. And that is profoundly wounding and traumatic for women. But of course, I mean, at some level, it is for the men too, because they're messing themselves up as much, at the same time. I think if we look through kind of levels of development, if I went back to my parents and grandparents' time, there was definitely a dynamic of strong men and the women were looking after the home, and that's how things were. Women didn't have really a chance to stand up. Then we moved through that, I would say in the 60s, kind of when I was growing up and through my teens and 20s into the 60s and 70s, we were moving into a time when there was much more equality. So women were more empowered and women could, yeah, the pill was available, sexuality, there was like more free sex, but of course then more exploitation at the same time. Um, Women could be stronger, they could be in their power and in their independence, but men were also free to, like there was more hippie kind of drumming and men's circles and going in the woods. Like it was, so the men could began, some men began to grow into a more feminine spirit, and some women began to grow into a more masculine spirit. So things became kind of more equal and a lot less polarity. And what that tends to do is create women who are more, yeah, independent, powerful, masculine, don't want to let go of that because they feel a lot safer. And men who are a bit kind of whoa, can't step into their power because they don't really feel safe in it. So it makes sex actually quite difficult because there's no polarity left. So it tends to be a kind of a sort of a fluid sexuality in a way. And then what comes after that is in developmental terms is a stage where women know their strength and they can be independent, and yet they can also surrender. And they want to be with a man, not because they need a man or depend on him, but because they want to be in that kind of union and partnership. And likewise, the men have found their feminine spirit, they found their softness, but they've been able to step into their masculine again, and then they can meet her and guide her, and and so they can meet as Shiva and Shakti in a beautiful sacred union.
mm,
Now, in that development, of course, people get stuck at all kinds of stages, and inevitably, teenagers are still like searching and confused, and so all kinds of trouble happens with trying to find their identity. I mean, I would say sexuality is such a confusing thing to grow into as a human being. even if everything was good, it's still confusing and difficult, and things are not good, and they've never been good, and they're not good now, and in fact, they're probably worse than they were when I was growing up because of social media. And um, so there's as a result of that, there's a mixture of all kinds of possibilities of how men and women meet and where they are in terms of their their developmental capacities. So then if we look at so that some women do have their power, but then they have to also learn to soften that and incorporate and integrate their feminine again. And some men are stuck in that early stage of power, that, where they're actually really exploitative and trying to be tough guys, which a lot of the teenagers are. But there's also a whole group of men who've got stuck in feeling that their sexuality is somehow wrong and they can't step into their sexual power. And that's also very frustrating for women. And then, there's also men around who've integrated that power, found their sexual power, integrated it with their feminine side so that they can step up into their masculine without being exploitative.
Mhm.
And all of that is out there. So it's all available, I think.
Yeah, thank you
Mm.
for bringing such insight and wisdom to that dynamic. I really see that you have a lot of awareness of what's going on a collective scale and
Yeah.
in terms of evolution. And yeah, there's a sacred union in that in itself, sort of women needing to integrate the masculine and then coming back to
Yeah.
the feminine,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
in a more empowered sense, and the same for
Yes.
men that they need to reclaim their
Yeah.
and then come back into their masculine and do that from a more um, softer and also
Yeah.
powered place. I guess that's
Powered place. And to both be connected to the divine, to the sacred. I mean, I think that also in our society, it got so lost with modernity, like science and spirituality got, you could have one or the other in a way.
yeah.
And we need to find our way through that to come back to the integration of spirituality and science in a way, so that we have like an embedded sense of our place in the universe and the sacred and God. Because without that, we get very focused on our little selves. We can get very me-centered, and it stops us being we-centered. It stops us opening to each other, to our communities. It stops us opening to love of each other and of this earth and God. So it's like it gets bigger, there's waves that go out, and we have to start with being um, alive in our essence with each other and with our whole feminine and our whole masculine embodied,
Mm.
and uh, and then letting that ripple outwards. So I tend not to go in for big activism. Personally, I'm more interested in teaching people to love themselves and each other, and God, so that they can find so those ripples go out into the world, because I think when we care about ourselves and each other, we cannot help but care for nature.
Mm.
We cannot help but care for our communities. It happens naturally, but it has to start with ourselves at home.
Yeah, I fully agree. I started off as a marine ecologist
Mm,
and was sort of in this, serving the world, but had not having healed myself, not having had that foundation, and then lost
yeah,
a lot because of that in many ways. So this is what also sent
yeah,
me on this path, and I really I think resonates so deeply that activism in itself is a form of also healing, doing the inner work as much as the outer, that they kind of need to go hand in hand.
mm,
Um, I often read when I sort of study the ancient tantric texts, or at least translations of that.
yeah, mhm,
The tantra is or has been developed as a spiritual practice for the Kali Yuga, which is the great
yeah,
time of the
yeah,
darkness that humanity is in.
yeah, yeah,
And in your book also, you write a lot about the three different power centers, right? Sort of the mind, the body, and the root power center. Could also maybe you want to translate that better, but we could also talk to them as chakras in some way. There's a connection
Yeah.
between chakras. And I'm curious what your personal experience has been, but also as a teacher, like what happens when we start working with these power centers and become more aware of them? How is that helpful?
Well, obviously the first thing is to come into the body, to come into the lower power centers, um, where there is so much power. So the center of instinct, uh, the center of our sexuality, and our power center. So those three centers are like the core power that drives us.
Mhm.
When we're not connected with those, we we end up kind of drifting in space, kind of dreamy. We're not really here. We're not able to create. And I hear a lot of my students talking about this. And you know, if they haven't found that place and found security and found embodiment in the lower chakras, they can kind of over spiritualize everything so that everything's floaty and almost dissociated, and there's no anchoring into the earth. So I think it's very hard for us to land in ourselves and our creative impulse if we don't have that. So that's important. Then we need to connect with our heart center to, I mean, to learn to love. But that disconnected from our body, of course, is also it's just one leg of the stool. So we need our heart center. I mean, in some way, that's like our fundamental human journey is to learn to love and
Mm.
to learn to love both ways in a way, to learn to love downwards into the earth and into our body, and also to learn to love upwards. So I'd say that's it's almost the transformation. It is the transformation center in our body. And then the mind, both the mind as we use it uh, in cognitive capacity, and the mind, the higher mind that we use to connect out to spirit, gives us our sense of place in the universe, and that we're not alone, that we're not, it's not just about this little self that's trying to do what it's trying to do. There's a bigger, like we can see our place in the world, so we can see our place in existence, and I think that makes everything more possible, less scary. Even death is less scary when you know, okay, this is, this is the journey I'm on right now in this body, and but I'm part of something much bigger, and that makes like both the preciousness of this human life, and it makes it possible to face death and be with it, and it's part of life. Yeah.
Mm. And how do you practice or teach a connection with those power centers? What do
So through the whole course of Living Tantra, so we start, I mean, actually they all weave together. There's some of them in all of, some of each of those centers is in all the workshops, but we start with the body. We start with the lower centers,
you?
really being able to come into an embodiment with dance, using touch, bringing in the heart center with our feelings, bringing in the power center with our feelings. So to come into connection with ourselves on a feeling sense and be able to connect to other people in that,
Mhm.
while we're also awakening our sex center. However, that wants to look, which is very different for every different person. So on a workshop, I sometimes say, look, okay, even if it's a touch structure, that doesn't mean you have to touch. Yeah. It just means that's what we're going to be exploring. And if your way of exploring that is not, I don't want to touch, that's completely okay. So nobody ever has to do anything, but there's also it's a big space where people can be quite adventurous, and there's a lot of permission to explore our body, our sexual nature. So the first one is really bringing ourselves into connection with the body and the heart. So to begin to say yes to our sexual nature, recognize ourselves as sexual beings, to begin to kind of rejoice in that and to be celebrated in that. And in the celebrations that we do, there is always an element of bringing in the sacred, that we do it in a ritual place. So uh, ritual always brings in a sense of that which is bigger than us, that goes back to the beginning of time. So that's already beginning to come in, and I would say people already begin to have transcendental experiences that are connected with their sexuality, but the focus is on their body and their acceptance of themselves. And then we develop that more and more through a deeper connection with sexuality and heart. So as we go on to Living Tantra 2, there's a really strong connection. So now we're working with heart very strongly and bringing sexuality and heart together and dancing in that. Then as we go on to Living Tantra 3, we begin to develop a connection between people. And how do I show up and stay in presence in your presence? So we're beginning to like make the circle wider. So I'm not just focusing so much on me, I'm focusing on how am I now in relation to others and in my relational capacities. And then we're using communication. We're using very simple tools of, the upsets that people get into, how they speak to each other, how they negotiate with each other, how they show up in what's true for them, how they're willing to say no and yes. I mean, that's really important. How they really learn to say yes and no to each other, without needing to close their hearts to each other. So there's a lot of relational stuff being built as we're doing that throughout the training, which has also a lot of shorter workshops in it. We're also working with parts work and the drama triangle and like really, seeing our full selves and landing in it and loving ourselves and seeing each other and developing compassion and listening skills. And then when we get to Living Tantra 4, we're looking at our relationship with the beloved or with source or with essence or whatever we decide we're going to use, what word we want to use individually for our connection to that which is beyond us. And we we work with that in a way by saying yes to life and including all of ourselves and including all of life in our thought processes and in the way that we connect and see each other so that we're not, it's like we're stepping out of the field of right and wrong and stepping out of the field of criticism and the field of, this is right and that's wrong. And so, which we do to ourselves and we do to everyone else. So we're stepping out of, it should be like this, and we're stepping into a much bigger embrace of life and love and existence and our very individual personal circumstances where we work a lot with a what we have a yes to and what we kind of push away from and bringing that all into the embrace so that we can be more whole actually, and therefore in that, in accepting ourselves more deeply, see the beloved wherever we look. So see the beloved in everyone's eyes. See the sacred wherever we look, because uh, our journey of Tantra is to include everything. So there is nothing that is not the beloved.
Mm.
And that sense of the sacred is there is nothing that is left out of that. It's not, oh, these are the good sacred ones and those are the bad ones. Somehow we have to bring that all together and step out of that field of right and wrong.
Mm.
So that's really our journey. We do some work in nature as well. Because it makes people vulnerable, we go camping together in a 200-acre valley that's very wild and has been rewilded, and we're there together, and that again brings like a sense of the wonder of nature and a visceral sense of being held by nature and what we need to give back to her and how we need to look after her. So that sense of it also builds a strong sense of community, because the people who are stronger, usually in the center, are often more vulnerable in the campsite. It tends to go that way. So people have to pull together. There was one time when we the first time we were at this particular valley, we'd hired a yurt or a dome or something, and I mean it rained more than it had rained for years, and this thing leaked like a sieve. So we had to all, I mean, people had to pull together. We just all had to be together in this tiny, tiny little um, African hut that was provided, and it was beautiful. It was one of the most powerful seminars, just because in adversity we had to come together. So the nature experience is very powerful. Yeah.
When are the next workshops and retreats coming up?
Coming up. So the next one will be the Passion, Power, and Love, which is our 5-day workshop. So that's over New Year. And that's a wonderful one for people to dive into when they don't know me at all, because it's over New Year. There's quite a celebratory aspect to it. We do a lot of looking backwards, a lot of visioning forward. We have a beautiful sacred ritual going into New Year, and then we party a bit afterwards with no alcohol. So we're really dancing and celebrating, and it really builds a strong community. So that one is suitable for couples and individual singles. It's suitable for everybody, and there's no nakedness, there's no focus on sexuality in that one. It's all about who are we when we just open to our feeling self, our body. We dance. There is some touch. There's a strong sense of connection and community, I would say, in that one. So that's a lovely way to introduce yourself to our work. And then February and in April, there'll be Living Tantra 1, which is the beginning of the whole series. So some people just do Living Tantra 1 and that's enough for them forever. So that's 20th to the 27th of February and over Easter, the 2nd to the 9th of April. And some people want to do just Living Tantra 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is the series. And some people, realizing how deep this work is, then want to jump into the 18-month training, which includes Living Tantra 2, 3, and 4, but it also includes these 6 extra workshops, which really build a community where we open out to whatever's happening. So we work with whatever's going on. We do the parts work, lots of communication stuff. It's less structured and more responding to whatever is going on in the group. So it's where people really get to know each other very strongly in that. So that's kind of the arc of our year. We do a couples workshop, actually, just for couples, a 3-day one. The next one, we usually do one a year now. So there's one the 3rd to the 6th of April where we work with couples and the relationship. Very much the power dynamics actually usually comes up, and how that's got twisted and how we can find our way back and the vision we want for our relationship. And then we also work with sexuality with couples, but they always go to their own, like they do it in the privacy of their own room. So we give them an exercise and off they go into their own room. So we work a little differently with couples with that.
Curious about that particular theme, having been at a few Tantra festivals now around the world last year, or this year actually, taught in India at the Goa Tantra Festival there. And it happens everywhere I go that couples show up at these festivals and then separate because there's like some trigger or some big event. Often Tantra involves a lot of partner switching and a lot of like exercises that you do with others. And so in my experience with clients, often couples come to me being very wary of Tantra and sort of, it's all some cult that will break their relationship apart. I'm wondering if you want to.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. So we have a lot of couples who come to our workshops. Like I said, so we do workshops for couples. Passion, Power, and Love is suitable for couples. When people want to come to the Living Tantra series, these days I suggest they come on their own. The reason is that it's deep inner work. We tend to work in groups of 4 most of the time, and so that you're working in a field of sexual energy, but you're not trying to relate to somebody and get something to happen. And it's a sacred space, so it's like a held space, which enables people to do their own healing work and find their own juice and their own new relationship to their sexual nature and their power and their confidence, and then bring that home to their partner. So I usually suggest that like a couple, one would come in February and one would come in April, or some of the teachers I've trained also do Living Tantra in the autumn. So like this time I know one couple, one of them went in the autumn and one will be coming in February to work with me because it gives them both something that is their own experience
Mhm.
and that they can then bring back to each other and they bring the gift back to each other. In the early years, I used to have couples come and it was just one whole drama where they just didn't get as much out of it as the people who were there on their own because they were either creating a drama with each other and getting jealous, or they were like falling into each other so they didn't have to interact with anybody else and like they had their safe space to retreat to. It didn't work either way. So we've had a number of couples who've come um, to do Living Tantra and do the whole Living Tantra training separately. Like one is done 1 year and one's done the following year. And what I've seen is that has been really an incredibly powerful tool to build relationship and not to go into the drama, but to really focus on um, what they can grow in themselves to bring back to the relationship. And then often, they might come to a relationship workshop as well to bring it together. But what I found is that works much better. And I think there is, it seems to be quite, I noticed that polyamory is quite fashionable these days. And, that in festivals, it's almost put up as like, this is the highest tier you could reach to. And I think for most couples aren't actually there. I think it's very rare for both couples to actually be mature enough and actually want to put themselves through that. Usually there's a power dynamic where one is kind of feeling like they've got to, or they should, and they're hurting each other. And I think I'm not sure that's very helpful. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that couples open up. I mean, that isn't part of Tantra anyway. I would say being in a committed relationship and learning how to love each other is more Tantra, actually. It's like the relationship between Shiva and Shakti. In fact, even one of the most beautiful verses of the Radiant Sutras is about daring to love one person.
Mm.
And that's from an ancient tantric text. So I think there isn't, for people who want to explore that, that's fine. But I think for people who are on a path of trying to be in a secure, functioning relationship and trying to learn how to love each other,
Mm.
um, they can for sure explore Tantra, but they just need to know what they're about and what their intention is, and that it's not just to have lots more sex with lots of other people. That's because that is not going to work for contributing to their relationship, actually. It's not what I'm about anyway.
Thank you for speaking to that.
Yeah.
And also for bringing in the gifts that Tantra can bring back to a relationship.
Yeah.
In my own experience, being in a long-term relationship, I can definitely see how much we benefit from going into ritual and practice together. And I'm curious if you want to speak a little bit more to what Tantra has to offer in terms of what those gifts maybe look like in a relationship, maybe also in your own relationship or your experience.
Um,
Mm.
I mean, so in our work,
Mhm.
we tend to use ritual for individuals in small groups of four. So the ritual is it's individual, that deep inner work. But then we bring that back. That gives us a sense of who we are as a being, as a sexual being that we can bring back into our relationship. So in that sense, it's coming like from our inner work to bring that together, which means that then we can see each other in a bigger frame. We can see through the other one's eyes. We can see the beloved in each other, and we can stop trying to make sex be something that just gets us out of stress or gets us, into something we want, and start using it as a way of um, connecting on all levels. So connecting, our body, our power, our heart, connecting our spirit so that we're vibrating together and and flowing with all those energies. It's like our bodies, our physical bodies and our subtle bodies are making love so that we can connect and see each other in a much bigger, softer, more all-encompassing dance.
Mm,
And uh, I think sexuality then becomes something that emerges through our lovemaking so that it's it's a way of like it's an opening. It opens us to each other, it opens us to God. And so it just has a completely different quality.
mhm,
So yeah, I think Tantra absolutely has lots and lots of gifts I mean, infinite gifts for couples and infinite gifts for individuals. You definitely don't have to be in a couple because I think sometimes there's so much, the depth of personal growth that can happen through tantric practice and the tantric workshops is enables you then to meet somebody who you can meet.
mhm,
So it sets you up for relationship.
mhm.
I would say that the training that we do sets you up to learn how to be in relationship because we actually don't learn that.
I haven't done your training, but I definitely resonate with like the
Mm.
tantric path that I have already chosen a few years before I
Yeah,
met my beloved.
yeah,
Um, Especially working with also the archetypal energies of masculine and feminine, uh,
yeah.
which really healed my inner couple in many ways,
Hmm.
in a
Yeah,
relationship,
yeah,
and also
yeah,
changed
yeah,
how I related in the outer couple in that way.
yeah.
And another thing that just came to my mind is a book by Jamie Wheal. Have you ever heard of Jamie Wheal?
Yes, I have. Yeah, I've read a couple of his books.
Oh,
Yeah,
good. Yeah, so he wrote
yeah,
one book, Recapture the Rapture, which
yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
contemplates this story of our time. And he says one of the important practices of this time is to engage with our sexuality because it's such a strengthener of our mental health, of our well being, of our nature,
Mm.
of our animal instincts, everything that you just
Yeah,
said.
yeah.
And he was one of the only people I think that really did some research and showed data on like what happens when
Mm.
we engage in sexual practice on a regular basis and how
Yeah,
transformational that is on all levels.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's good for us as long as it's healthy and not dysfunctional. I mean, that's why, we have to start with building up people's ability to just say yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
To know what they want, to be connected to their bodies so that actually, even in sexual excitement, they don't leave their bodies. They don't get swept away to the place where they end up doing things that actually next morning they wish they hadn't done. So it has to start like really with the nuts and bolts and the nitty-gritty of how do we actually in reality connect with each other and enjoy touch and allow our sexual feelings to flow through us, allow ourselves to feel that flow of sexual energy, not be frightened of the intensity of all these energies within us. Um, and then we can find a way into bliss together. And that is profoundly healing. And when you can bring that into your relationship and nourish and nurture that and make space for that out of the everyday, stuff that most of us have to deal with, but actually to prioritize that physical connection that's rooted in deep in our being. Yeah, I think that's profoundly healing and connecting to ourselves and to spirit. And it gives us a kind of a like it's like it stokes the fire so that when we go out into the world, we've got energy. It's like we are overflowing with love. So we can generate that love between us so that it can then pour out into the world. Yeah, so absolutely. I remember reading, it's a few years since I've read his books, but actually I remember thinking, oh yeah, he would really enjoy our workshops. This is like right aligned. Yeah.
And then I don't know why it popped into my head, but I'm gonna be curious and ask this question: from what age do you think like people should engage with Tantra? Like how young are
Yeah.
your earliest
Mm,
participants, and could we bring this into schools, or is there any?
mm,
I feel that's
yeah.
missing in many ways for our youth to
Yeah.
send them on the right
It is. So in our workshops, I think the youngest we've had has been 21 or 22.
path.
And the oldest has been probably 87 or 88. I mean, there's
Wow.
the entire range, and I really like that. That's nearly, obviously it peaks in the middle somewhere, but there's space for everybody to be there. Everybody benefits hugely. I would say, in terms of younger people, it's tricky, and it's absolutely true that our youth are missing out. They need a lot of support and help. And there are beginning to be, I know some of my students have started teaching in schools. So it's beginning to ripple out. And it's not easy. There's a lot of other strong influences. And, I remember when I was a teenager, I thought I knew everything.
Mhm.
I thought, everything I knew was better than everybody. Nobody was going to tell me anything. So I'm not sure teenagers are always that receptive. I think maybe we need to create an environment where at least it's not toxic, but where they can make their own mistakes. And some basic education around consent
Mhm.
and some basic education around real sex as opposed to porn sex
Mhm.
would be really helpful. So they just have some basic information because where they're getting it from right now is pretty crap. I mean, it was even when I was 12 or 13, but I think it's actually worse now.
Yeah.
So I think that basic information is what they need so they can make their own little mistakes and they're hopefully not terrible mistakes. And so they can have some kind of a vision also that, sex is actually lovely and that everybody should be enjoying it. If anyone's not enjoying it, something is wrong. So I think if especially if girls got that message and if boys got the message that it's fine to not know and to fumble around, and it'd be nice if they had some basic information about how they could please a woman, but perhaps that has to come, in the later teens and the early 20s. I hope it's beginning to happen. I know it is beginning to happen in some places, but yeah, there's unfortunately a deluge of misinformation to counteract.
I have.
Plus the normal teenage hormones that, are definitely not necessarily conducive to being told what they ought to be doing.
Right. I think testosterone levels increase by 700% for male teenagers in that way. So yeah, no
Yeah, I mean,
wonder.
it's a wild time. Being a teenager is a wild time. It's not easy. It's like, wow. How do we ever get through that?
I know, but just when I recall like my own experiences, for example, I was really scared of sex. That was like
Yeah,
for many different reasons, a really terrifying
yeah,
thing. So I deflowered myself like with a carrot without any, and it was so brutal. Like when I just think of
yeah,
that ritual and how that was, it's like
yeah,
I'm, yeah, just so compassionate to how that obviously then had to be trauma worked out of my yoni in many
yeah,
ways, and like just
yeah.
simple things of like a little bit of guidance, and that was recommended by a psychotherapist to do that. So
Well, I think that's a bit of a problem, really, because I think a lot of psychotherapists come and do my Tantra training actually, because
good.
their training doesn't, I mean, it involves talking about sex, but it doesn't actually heal their sexuality. And so a lot of them come to really find their way through experientially embodying their sexuality. So, I mean, I don't think anyone who'd been through one of my trainings would suggest you use a carrot.
Not recommended.
It's a horrific idea.
Oh, blessings on my teenage self.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm aware we are approaching the end of
yeah.
this podcast. I would love to tap into one more thing, and that is that I've heard rumors that you're not going to be doing work forever. I'm curious if you want to share
Yeah,
a little bit about,
yeah,
how long
yeah.
I'm still here
How
and
long?
what's
Yeah.
happening
I
next.
mean, okay, so the truth is, none of us know, do we? I mean, none of us know. Let's face it, we could just drop dead tomorrow. That's one thing. So we don't know. What we do know is that we're all going to die. So I'm not going to go on forever because actually, at some point, my life will end.
I know it was a joke, but yeah.
Yeah, but it's true. I mean, really,
Yeah.
beyond that, so what we do know is that for sure we are starting a new training in 2026. we're not going to do a cliff edge stop. We have got teachers we've trained, and going forward, we're not exactly sure when we're going to stop. I mean, I've never said to anybody, we're going to stop, but these rumors have been going around for years. I don't know who starts them. But for sure, we are beginning to, we have Ed Rook and Bethan Evans leading Living Tantra 1, and they're doing a fantastic job. And they will begin to take over some of the workshops at some point, and we have other teachers coming up ready to, behind them to teach the shorter workshops, the meetings without masks, the intro to Living Tantra, and then to start leading Living Tantra. And then somehow we have to get into discussions so that hopefully I can taper off and do a little less. As we get older, our energy gets less. I mean, that is true. I definitely can see over the last 5 years even, I have less energy. I mean, I still have more energy than most people, to be honest, but still, I have less energy than I used to have. And I'm not doing as much as I used to, and I'm gradually tapering it off. So the truth is, we haven't worked it out and we don't exactly know, but we have plans to make sure that the legacy of Living Tantra carries on, that there's teachers carrying on. There's the tribe of all the graduates of the Living Tantra training continue to meet, and they can do that. And I think they meet 3 times a year. And with a whole, like 50 or 60 of them get together and have like a mini festival together. And they can do that without me there. So the community is thriving, and hopefully it will continue to thrive and grow. And we need to put into place enough things that continues, and the Living Tantra workshops continue to feed that community. My wish is that Living Tantra is something that continues to grow and flourish well beyond my time on this earth. Yeah, and it's precious work to me. I mean, it's my life work, it's my soul work, it's what matters to me and gives me meaning in life. So I don't want to just stop, but I also have to be in reality that I'm not probably going to go on functioning forever. So at some point I need to taper it off and make sure that in me tapering it off, enough other people have been tapered in to take over. Yeah.
Thank you for doing this precious work, and thank you for
Yeah.
being here.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. It was fun to talk with you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
such a joy. And I just want to mention that there's a link to your book, to your
Oh,
website.
great. Oh, yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah.
Book. I
Yeah.
highly recommend it. And yeah, on the website, people can find the upcoming
Well,
workshop.
yeah. 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 There's a calendar where all the workshops are listed, and the teachers who I've trained, their workshops should be on there too. And yeah, the book's there to order. And actually the flow of being meditation, you can order that too, which is the morning meditation we do in all the workshops. That's also on there. Yeah. Yeah, and actually loads of press stuff. All the press articles are on there. There's on a tab. So there's loads of material on there if people want to dive in and have a little bit of a sense of who I am. They can do that pretty easily.
Yeah,
Yeah,
beautiful.
great. Thank you so much.
We have come to the end of this interview, but not to the end of this podcast yet. I'm inviting you first of all to give this a like, whether you're on YouTube watching or on any of the podcast channels. It really helps me to spread the word and make this more accessible to more people. And then I'm inviting you to come into an embodiment practice, just to ground this a little bit and to give yourself a little bit of nourishment to take this in and to slow down for a moment. We live in such a fast-paced world. And so maybe you want to close your eyes. Maybe you want to let your hands just drop somewhere on your body. And really take this in as a form of nourishment, to really hold yourself, whether it's your heart or any other part of your body. And receive this touch as if somebody else was touching you, to really be present with this touch, with this receiving quality, with this nourishing, maybe energizing quality. Maybe there's also a loving quality inside your touch. And to take a few breaths here, and just to notice what that does for your nervous system to be with you in this moment. And then I'm inviting you from here to share anything that you're grateful for towards yourself. Like, what in yourself do you feel grateful for right now? Like, I'm grateful for the softness in my voice, or I'm grateful for how my body dances and moves me, helps me feel alive. And the final invitation is to sign up to my newsletter. If you want to support me creating this podcast, which takes a fair bit amount of time and work, then the best way you can support me is by signing up to my newsletter, where I share a tantric approach to sex, love, and relationships. I share about my own life journey, my experiences, but also practical tools that you can apply in your everyday reality, whether you're single or in a relationship. Having said that, I predominantly work with couples on transforming their relationship from one of power, struggle, and tension into a sacred union relationship. And there's many juicy transformational practices and tools that you'll receive, so it's absolutely worth it. And I would love to see you in my newsletter family. Thank you so much for being here with me on this journey. I would appreciate any comments or feedback, and I'd love to see you in the next episode. So much love for the rest of your day.